on bus stops, and these were created by the Human Resource Administration, or HRA, here in New York. And of course, there was a big campaign against them, and eventually they were taken down. For a brief period of time, this billboard appeared in the Soho neighborhood, but it was part of a national campaign where, by people who were pro-life and, well, I call them anti-abortion because that's different than being pro-life. And people claim pro-life, but I don't know that it's a bit of a, what do you call that? Misnomer, because if they were pro-life, they might also be against the death penalty in war, but that's usually not the case. But this saying, blaming basically black women for genocide of their own communities for choosing an abortion.
Was there pushback on that ad?
Yeah, it was removed. Yeah, it was locally removed. And all of them, but we had to have a major campaign, and from that sprung up a group called Trust Black Women, because the campaign was waged by, really strong religious right, several organizations. I won't go into all the detail because I'm sure I'll not have enough time to get to everything else, but you can, if you go to that site, that's abortion.com, and also if you look at some of the reproductive justice sites, you can find the history of the pushback. So that one went down rather quickly because we had a lot of people galvanized here in New York and rallies to make that happen. And there have since been, in some cities, alternative billboards that were put up that are quite beautiful to convey a different message. Since Trump, we've seen appointments of cabinet members who are hostile to reproductive justice principles, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. Kind of giving you the reverse. I'm telling you the bad news, I'm going to tell you kind of the response. The immigration ban on Muslims, undocumented, and refugees. The rescinding of environmental review of the North Dakota pipeline to allow it to go forward. And defunding Planned Parenthood. And just yesterday, finally seeing the replacement proposals for the Affordable Care Act and how unresponsive they are to ensuring that people have access to care, and so forth and so on. It just goes on and on. And every day we check to see what's the latest, right? So that said, reproductive justice is the complete physical, mental, spiritual, political, economic, and social well-being of women and girls, and again, thinking more broadly, those who identify as women and girls, and will be achieved when women and girls have the economic, social, and political power and resources to make healthy decisions about our bodies, sexuality, and reproduction for ourselves, our families, and our communities in all areas of our lives. That's a definition that was introduced by Asian Communities for Reproductive Justice, now called For Together, and some of the they are some of the folks that have created some of the alternative messaging that I referred to, and they were an early member of the Sister Song Collective. Reproductive justice is not a rephrasing of old messages. It is not a substitute for phrases like pro-choice. It's not about being politically correct in our messaging. It's not applicable only to women of color, and it's not only about abortion rights. It is critical to health equity, which is the definition from Healthy People 2020. I don't know if anyone here studies health or anything related to health, so maybe I'll, yes? Okay, so 2020 is like this plan that was set forward, public health goals for us to achieve by 2020. There was a 2010, and so every decade, these goals are set forward for us to accomplish, and usually about reducing health disparities and outcomes that are considered socially unjust or inequitable. And I just always like to point out the difference between equality and equity. If you've never seen this before, if you talk about equality, you're talking about everybody being treated the same. If you talk about equity, you're talking about giving people according to their need. But if you're talking about justice, we're talking about tearing down the damn fence, okay? As Audre Lorde tells us. So tearing down the fence begins with a reframing of women's health and women's rights. So there's been three frameworks that have pretty much evolved in response to reproductive oppression. Reproductive health, reproductive rights, and reproductive justice. And you can think of them in terms of what they do and who's involved, how they analyze what the problem is and how to address it, who their constituents are, and who the key actors are, if that makes sense, right? So I'm just going to have you read through that for a minute instead of having me do that for you. But reproductive justice is primarily an organizing model that focuses on intersectionality as a way to organize communities. And it's different than focusing on just meeting the needs through services or protecting an individual's right to access those services. And also you engage the community members who are most impacted themselves to lead the response. And these are, of course, the different folks who would be involved or the roles they might play. And these aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes some of us move between these three different approaches. And all three are important. Like we almost can't have one without the other, right? But there are some, limitations of each as well. So with reproductive health and this focus on services and needs, it tends to not to be limited to the individual level and not the systemic problems that impede having access to care. It can be very resource intensive. So we put a lot into health care. We don't put a lot into prevention, for example, including what people can do themselves to keep well. So when we talk about healthcare, one of the issues, and I'm sorry that she's gone, of intersectionality has to do with understanding and grasping people's own right to be self-determining about their health. And if you're allowed for that, then there isn't this kind of, maybe down the road there wouldn't be as much need for all this care on the back end that is usually astronomically expensive and sometimes harmful in and of itself. So sometimes the treatments, the cures of our current healthcare system, this focus on pharmacology, for example, and its expensive, profit-based existence within capitalism is problematic. And also that there are inherent access issues, that we've spoken about. Reproductive rights, really important. It tends to think about our rights as a legal protection that's enforced by our laws, and that we can ensure an individual woman's legal right to something, to have health care, to have access to an abortion. And it usually does this through legal, legislative channels. And there are various people involved in even electoral politics. But again, focusing on individual choice, like I said, we had Roe v. Wade, but with the Hyde Amendment, that was almost wiped away for large segments of our country, and that's problematic. And then there's also, even after we have rights, the monitoring, the ensuring that those rights are protected is ongoing and requires a lot more than saying that these rights exist. So ways to reframe is to understand the historical context of the control of indigenous and women of color's reproduction and its consequences on their health and well-being, to listen and respect their self-determination and bodily autonomy, to practice humility and to take risks, really take risks for deeper understanding and engagement with those who are most marginalized in our society. Still others to join and collaborate with organizations and coalitions that are led by those who are most affected in all of their intersectional identities, and to be an informed citizen, a voter, an ally, an advocate, an agitator, by actually putting some skin in the game when these issues are under attack, or when their bodies, their reproduction are under attack. And to reflect and work to transform our institutional policies and practices that impede reproductive justice. I'm not going to go over this these slides will be made available to anyone who attends. There were a whole bunch of international global meetings and then meetings that happened here in the United States that over time have contributed to the development and evolution of the reproductive justice, both as a framework and as a movement. And I entered around here, around 2002, for the planning of this convening in Atlanta, where we first put it forward as a movement. speaking of the March for Women, the Women's March on Washington that happened on January 21st as being the largest march on Washington ever. Well, before that, there was this march. And it was originally to be a march for choice, but it was because at this meeting in Atlanta, when a lot of us got together with the mainstream women's organizations who also came to that meeting, it was at Spelman College in Atlanta, we told them, as they were planning for this march to happen the following April, this was in November, so the following April they were already planning for that march, we told them if you didn't consider some of our needs in our agenda, we weren't going to show up, which would have made it a pretty small march. And it also led to Loretta Ross, who was our national coordinator, Sister Song, becoming the co-chair and changing the name of the march to the March for Women's Lives, to take into consideration their entire lives and not just access to abortion and choice, because choice language was really limited to abortion only. So that's significant. So finally, what is reproductive justice? It has some principles, and it is that